Hello and welcome back to the programme with me, Rosie Wright. Riot police and protesters have fought running street battles in the Belarusian capital, Minsk, following the victory of Alexander Lukashenko in this weekend's presidential election. Security forces used rubber bullets, tear gas and water cannon to quash protests. Mr. Lukashenko has won with 80.2% of the vote. But the main opposition candidate said she did not trust the figures, which initially gave her just 7% of the vote. Jay Marquez reports.
As night fell in Belarus, tensions which had been building up ahead of Sunday's election erupted onto the streets. There was anger as President Alexander Lukashenko claimed his sixth term, extending his iron grip that started in 1994. There is much discontent with his authoritarian rule and his dismissal of the coronavirus pandemic. Security forces used stun grenades in what's been described as the biggest clashes in the country's history. Opposition supporters say these election officials have manipulated the results to give the 65-year-old a sixth term. The main opposition candidate, Svetlana Tikhonovskaya, came under heavy pressure over the weekend as 8 members of her staff were arrested and one of her top aides fled the country on Sunday. Protests also broke out in the major cities of Gomel, Grodno and Vitebsk, and police fired tear gas at demonstrators in Brest and the capital Minsk. Jay Marquez, Euronews.
Our international correspondent Annalise Borges is in Minsk. We are having difficulty, though, this morning to speak to her live because of the internet outages that are in the country. We did speak to her a short while ago, though, and she gave us this update on the current situation.
Well, it all started at around 8 p.m. local time when people received the preliminary results of the election. And, of course, those results pointed out the fact that Alexander Lukashenko had won once again. People had been talking about that they expected these results, and so they had this meeting point set up. Their idea was to gather in large numbers last night to protest these expected results. But internet had been cut out. Nothing was working. The phones were not working. Social media was not working. And so people were quite lost. A lot of young voters and older voters too were trying to find this meeting point, wondering if they needed to go there again. Police set up roadblocks to try to make it hard for these protesters to get to this point. And even though this had been organized in this way, protesters in large numbers were able to get really close to a monument to the victims of World War II, which is what they decided to do to protest the election results. We were in one of the avenues leading to this monument, and what we saw were hundreds, thousands of people in the streets. But what was interesting is that they were largely peaceful. They were clapping, they were applauding, they were chanting "Long live Belarus" and other slogans that just cherished their country and their dreams. They were turning on the lights of their cell phones and really waiting to see what they were going to be able to do, whether or not they were actually going to be able to really reach that monument. We were a couple hundred meters away from the monument itself, and pretty much what we could see was that all the avenues leading to this monument had people on them. And a few hours went by. At around 11 or 11:30 local time, a heavy presence of the police was felt. Police really encircled the monument and started blocking these avenues, so there was no way people were going to get any further. And at around midnight, the clashes started. What we saw was a very very heavy-handed police tactic to disperse these crowds. They used water cannons, they used tear gas, and obviously that does not sound like heavy-handed tactics, but in view of what the protesters were doing, which was nothing, they were clapping and chanting slogans and not really moving, not really forcing their way forward, it really felt like there was a very heavy-handed police response.
President Lukashenko's sweeping victory had been widely expected, but his main challenger, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, held some of the country's largest political rallies since the days of the Soviet Union. She replaced her husband in the race after he was arrested. During the campaign, she was forced to go into hiding herself and sent her children abroad for their safety. Evelyn Lavrick reports on the disputed result.
Even before polling stations in Belarus had fully closed, the country's state TV had declared that President Alexander Lukashenko was well on his way to a sixth consecutive term. The authoritarian ruler has won the last 5 elections, and an official exit poll quickly claimed he'd done it again with over 79% of the vote. After casting his ballot, Lukashenko issued this warning to the opposition.
If you're going to go against our country, or even in the smallest way try to plunge the country into chaos and destabilise it, you'll receive an immediate response from me.
His main challenger, Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, is said to have only polled around 6%, a figure she's rejected. The 37-year-old entered the election in place of her jailed husband and has harnessed a popular wave demanding change. She expressed no fear of Lukashenko.
I wish the best for my country and hope it will fall. I don't have any reason to be arrested, so why not? Why should I be scared?
But during the day, military vehicles were seen on the streets. Security forces allegedly started rounding people up. Parts of the city centre were closed off and at least 8 opposition campaign workers were detained. Political analysts say it's not clear-cut how people will respond.
Those from the right and those from the left, they all unite behind one thing, which is Lukashenko must leave. There's been no freedoms in Belarus for a quarter of a century, 26 years, but only a small part of society was worried about this until very recently.
The election outcome is no surprise, nor is a report of widespread violations at the ballot box. Even before the elections, Lukashenko had himself said he wouldn't be giving up power. Evelyn Lavrick, Euronews.
Well, for reaction to the Belarus election, we're going to go to Russia now to speak to our correspondent Galina Polanskaya, who's in Moscow for us. Morning to you, Galina. Now, obviously, there are strong historical links between Belarus and neighbouring Russia. Has there been reaction yet from the Kremlin to the results that we've just had confirmed?
Morning, Rosie. Not yet, but definitely the Kremlin has been watching those elections very closely, and we are expecting this reaction in the coming hours. The ties are indeed close, but we can't say that the relations between Vladimir Putin and Alexander Lukashenko are perfect. You know that there were Russians arrested in Belarus, and some analysts here call them hostages that would assure that Russia will be supporting the results of the elections. On the other hand, analysts say that those protesters and this protest movement is a very scary signal for Russia, as it could be an example for Russians in the coming years. I've spoken to Belarus diaspora voting here in Moscow yesterday, and indeed for them the results of those elections, we have 80 or something % for Lukashenko, are not a surprise, and many think that the elections are frauded, and many fear what will come next. Let's listen to what Veronika Tsepkala, one of the women's trio who also voted in Moscow, told me yesterday.
Please, guys, don't shoot your people. We're Belarusians. We do not want war. We want to live in a safe, prosperous country. I hope that they will hear us. I hope that they understand that when shooting at their people, among these people there may be their mothers, their fathers, their brothers, their sisters, friends, children. I hope they come to their senses at the last minute. And if they receive this illegal order, they will not allow bloodshed. I appeal again to law enforcement agencies, please do not allow bloodshed.
Her husband, Valery Tsepkalo, who had been barred from those elections, texted me this morning that the results of those elections is a monstrous falsification, just a spit of Lukashenko in the face of the Belarusian people. He also wrote that this was not just falsification, that Lukashenko started a war against his people, a war for illegal